Hello, and today is Thursday, November 5th. Um, yeah, I'm getting a little bit ahead. I'm still at school. This is Monday. But those who were here today for the A group, one day we're going to get rid of all these A's and B's. I need you all in here together, and we need to be here 5 days a week because I'm very concerned about our level of retention and that we don't know what the date 1648 is significant for. Why 1517? Things of that nature. We don't know who Thomas More is. You know, inexcusable. I mean, you got to know these people, guys. Not knowing what occurred in 1914. And, that sounds so trivial, so minutia, and in a way it is, but at the same time, as a person who takes an AP course, you got 1914. Oh, that's World War One. 1648. Oh, that's Peace of Westphalia. Ended the 30 Years' War. Yeah, simple. Um, you know, just a few dates. Got to have a ballpark vision. And so, yeah, that was for me shocking. But let's get to work, shall we? And let's continue to cover this Enlightenment. It's a long chapter, as I'm sure you'd agree. I've got the test almost finished, so have no fear. And so, yes, women, Roman 17, talk about women. Once again, in me, I am in favor of history being accurate. Now, I'm not going to use the word truth because truth is a subjective term. One person's truth is another person's less than truth, lie. But yes, being accurate in history, these things occurred. The recent trend in history books of all levels, including AP, has been to give women credit for participating in history at a higher level than what they did. Now, please don't mind Mr. Horton hates women, he's sexist. Not quite, but I mean, you need to be accurate. To be real honest, women have been since the dawn of time pushed into the closet, pushed into a backseat role, have been discriminated against, have been abused, and when you still consider the simple fact that one of the leading causes for death in this civilized country of ours, not to mention the rest of the world, one of the leading causes for death for women is murder at the hands of a man who, at some point in their relationship, professed love for this woman. There's something wrong with that. Something very wrong with that. And so, no, I'm not sexist, but I am, as the old saying goes, I am an historian first. So, women, especially in France, help significantly to promote the careers of the philosophers. They served coffee and alcohol. Salons in Paris were these watering holes for the philosophers where they could exchange ideas, drink coffee and alcohol, and in debating, the philosophers could gain respectability for those ideas. However, the women who were organized these salons, now that's what they did. The best thing that women were allowed to do would be to host the salons. And, outside of that, they need not apply. But the women who organized these salons were well connected to major political figures who could help protect the philosophers and secure their pensions. So, yeah, for example, the Marquise de Pompadour, the mistress of Louis XV. I mean, I should tell you several things. The woman's title was that she had sex with the king and was not his wife. Yeah. Overcame, and I'm not talking about her necessarily, but I'm talking about the fact that a king has an official mistress. Goes to show the role of women. But for this woman, the Marquise de Pompadour, and by the way, Pompadour, women, and here's the interesting thing: women in the era of the 18th century, they spent a lot of time fixing their hair. Particularly this woman, the Marquise de Pompadour, her hair was made into some architectural monstrosities. Some of their hairstyles would have, ships that used either their hair or fake hair, and others would have baskets of fruit woven into their hair. Others would have bird cages with birds in them. Birds. And birds are not housebroken, living in your hair. I'm sorry, but yeah. But the name pompadour eventually became a hairstyle. Elvis Presley had a pompadour. Mr. Arlinghouse wants a pompadour, but no. Yes, the name pompadour, the hairstyle. And you say, what is that, Mr. Horton? I'm not familiar. Well, a pompadour for males, and it was a male hairstyle eventually, was this hair that actually created a front porch out here, where they would use grease and pomade in the hair. And I had to admit, when I was growing up, young men used to put grease, and it was grease. It was Brill cream, little dab of do you, and they would use that to slick their hair, make their hair stay straight, and yes, they could even make it go forward and up and flip back, and that was called a pompadour, named after the Madame Pompadour, Marquise de Pompadour. But here's the more important statement: the philosophes were not strong feminists, which is the understatement of the year. Montesquieu maintained in general that the status of women in a society was the result of the climate of the political regime, the culture, and women's physiological nature. In other words, what they looked like. Gee, that's something new. Women being judged on their appearance. It is unfair that women are so judged on their appearance. For example, women running for office, running for political office, if they don't meet a certain standard of physical appearance, that's the first thing their opponents say about them. They use some kind of reference of their physical appearance to ride the woman down. Yes. I mean, for example, when the president, the current president, was in office, his wife, Melania, of course, was once a model, very attractive woman from a physical standpoint. And of course, I saw so many postings with my Facebook friends. Isn't it great that we finally have a first lady and they go on to be attractive and things like that, decrying other first ladies? That's so shallow and worthless. And I need to stop talking or I'll get fired up. I guess the election's upon me, and I'm wanting the thing to be over. Anyway, Montesquieu, believed that women were not naturally inferior to men and should have a wider role in society. He did recognize the double standard placed upon women, with their worth being connected to their appearance, which in turn was linked to their age. Montesquieu did indicate a belief in the traditional view of marriage and family and expected men to dominate the marriage and the families. He said, for although he supported the right of women to divorce and opposed laws directly oppressive to women, of which there are many we'll explore later on, he upheld the idea of female chastity. Nice thought, but you notice he doesn't go around preaching about male chastity. It is the double standard. The views about women expressed in the Enlightenment Encyclopedia, which was supposed to be the highest intellectual document of the day, were less than generous towards women. Less generous to women than Montesquieu had been, and Montesquieu, most of the articles that dealt with women specifically or that discussed women in connection with other subjects often emphasized once again their physical weakness and inferiority, which were attributed to menstruation and childbearing. The articles also typified women as frivolous and unconcerned with important issues. Once again, this was supposed to be the smart book. The encyclopedia discussed women primarily in a family context as wives, mothers, and daughters. Motherhood was the most important occupation of women, and the encyclopedist, the writers of the encyclopedia, the Enlightenment Encyclopedia, right, upheld the double standard when it came to women's sexuality. Please don't tell me I don't have to explain the double standard to you intelligent people regarding sexuality, that men can have sex all they want, and actually they're praised for it. Women who have sex get called bad names. There. Jean-Jacques Rousseau urged a very conservative and traditional role for women. Well, duh. In Emile, his book, and I should write that in italics. In Emile, he set forth both a radical version of the view that men and women should occupy different spheres. Women should be educated for a position subservient to men. In his view, women had little role but to make themselves pleasing to men. I'm so shocked that Rousseau felt like that. A man who would impregnate women and then take their offspring and dump them off at foundling hospitals. What a guy. Women were weaker than men in all capacities except for the capacity for feeling and giving love. Or as my former principal from a long time ago, not here, referred to the women and their natural nurturing abilities. I actually resent that. I was pretty nurturing as a dad. Yeah. As a dad, yeah. I will tell you, and Mr. Arlinghouse will concur, I'm sure he feels the same way, that regarding my son, only son, Wes, I changed at least half, no, I changed half to more than half of his diapers, gave him half to more than half of his baths, fed him half to more than half of his meals, played all of his little inane games with him where, but you play, and you spend time. And so, yeah, I was nurturing. I really was. I'm proud of that, as I'm sure Mr. Arlinghouse is. So, in spite of these views, and in spite of his own ill treatment of his own wife, who bore him many children, Rousseau achieved a vast following among women in the 18th century. How did he do that? I don't know. Of course, women in Paris were also chasing around Benjamin Franklin. I'm like, ugh. Anyway, electricity, right? He is credited with convincing upper-class women to breastfeed their own children instead of wet nursing them to poor women. In 1792, all right, here's one you write down. Here's one you make note of. Here's one that makes the AP Euro exam list every year. Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote the book of Vindication of the Rights of Women. By the way, Mary Wollstonecraft was the mother of Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. Yeah. But anyway, the mother, and Mary Wollstonecraft, very independent thinker, and that's how she gave birth to a very independent daughter. Mary Wollstonecraft Shelley married Percy Shelley, and they went off and lived in Italy with Lord Byron, whom we'll actually talk about later, and lived a very freewheeling life, drank a lot, rode a lot, and who knows what else they did. But Lord Byron, actually, they were romantics. They were our next great artistic movement, Romanticism. But they were romantics. Lord Byron was, such a romantic that he really got all jacked up about the cause of Greek independence from Turkey, from the Ottoman Empire, and goes and gets himself killed in the war for Greek independence. He dies of a fever anyway. Yeah. But anyway, and I'm still talking about Mary Shelley. Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. For amusement, when Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley, and Lord Byron would set up at night drinking alcohol, they would have contests making up ghost stories. Who could make up the scariest ghost story? And it said that Mary and Shelley and Percy Shelley used to run Lord Byron out of the room with the stories that were so frightening. But yes, that is where Frankenstein was born. Yes. So forgive me. Let's get back to the mother, shall we? Mary Wollstonecraft, who died shortly after giving birth to her youngest child, not Mary Shelley, accused Rousseau and others like him of attempting to narrow women's vision and limit their experience, and she was dead on right. Wollstonecraft was demanding for women the kind of liberty that male writers of the Enlightenment had been championing for men for over a century. In other words, she's just saying one same thing. The Rights of Woman, by the way, the book The Rights of Woman is a takeoff of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, the cornerstone document of the French Revolution. You do realize that, right? 1792, she wrote the Declaration of Rights of Woman, which was a takeoff of the 1789 document, Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. It's a takeoff, saying, why don't women have the same rights as man? Her man. Let her man do it. You like that, Mr. Arlinghouse? Anyway, Mary Wollstonecraft, broadened the agenda of the Enlightenment to include the rights of women as well as the rights of men, and she was flatly denied. Roman number 18. Monarchs of the time: Frederick the Great of Prussia, Joseph II of Austria, Catherine the Great of Russia, and to a lesser extent Louis XIV. Like to imagine that they were, the term is, enlightened despots. Let me write that down for you, Mr. Ramsey. The term is literally meaning smart kings. In other words, monarchs who had embraced the ideas of the Enlightenment, basically to show their constituency that they were hip, deaf, and jamming, that they got all this newfangled thinking stuff. And so, yeah, Frederick the Great of Prussia, Joseph II of Austria, and Catherine the Great of Russia. Of them all, it is worth mentioning that the most enlightened was Joseph II of Austria. We'll get to him later. So, most philosophers were not opposed to power if they could find a way of using it in their own purposes, or if they could profit in one way or another from their relationships to the strong monarchs. Voltaire was a very strong monarchist, the guy who said, I may not agree with you, but I defend to the death your right to be wrong. Voltaire was a strong monarch. He said we should have a king. Philosophers sought to redirect the power of monarchs towards rationalization of economic and political structures and the liberation of intellectual life. You say, what does that mean? These philosophers thought that they could influence these kings by saying, you want to be smart, don't you, king? You want to be hip, deaf, and jamming, don't you, king? You want to be with it, then, listen to these new ideas about the universe and about science, and oh yeah, the rights of man, and the fact that nobody should be a king. Yeah, so that a lot of kings said, no thanks. Enlightened absolutism, enlightened despots, same thing. Enlightened absolutism, smart kings, referred to the phenomenon of absolute monarchs seeming to embrace the ideas of the Enlightenment. For example, Frederick the Great of Prussia kept a place for Voltaire in his court. Last summer, when I was grading AP Euro exams, I had my AP Euro exam was on the Enlightenment, and there were 5 documents. And here's the kicker: each document was written by a different Enlightenment thinker. Of those 5 documents, the only Enlightenment thinker I recognize, and I'm not stupid, Mr. Arlinghouse. I know something about this history thing. But no, the only one I recognized was Voltaire. And that document simply had, and this is why I'm bringing it up, that document had Voltaire in a cartoon. Voltaire is sitting at a desk writing something, and Frederick the Great is standing next to him and asking him, pointing to it and asking him about it. And the point of that cartoon is to show enlightened thinking. Normally, Divine Rights of Kings, you don't sit while the king stands. But see, this cartoon shows the king standing and Voltaire sitting, and they're having a very polite discussion about whatever Voltaire is writing. Catherine the great Empress Zarina of Russia, wanted to be referred to as enlightened, but to be real honest, in the end, after the Pugachev Rebellion, which we'll talk about later on, Catherine the Great will, say this enlightenment stuff is for the birds, because there was actually plots against her life, and so she had all the works of the Enlightenment in the Russian court thrown into the fire. So she said, when push comes to shove, yeah. But now Joseph II, if you've ever watched the film Amadeus, which I highly recommend, it's a very Enlightenment film, imposed a series of religious, legal, and social reforms that contemporaries believed had come from the philosophes, and they really were. I mean, he really made some changes in his Austrian Empire. For one thing, doing away with the robot. In fact, striking down peasantry in the Austrian Empire. It wasn't permanent. As soon as he died, his brother, Leopold, simply reversed everything. So many monarchs adopted Enlightenment policies favoring the rational economic and social integration of the realms, because these policies also increase the military strength. What? It means that many of the scientific achievements of the Enlightenment enabled them to build better weapons. Yeah. Some philosophers could be influenced by the flattery of the attention of the monarchs. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of these philosophers could, well, the king likes me, so, I can kind of overlook him cutting off people's heads arbitrarily. Yeah, he's a cool guy. That's what it means. For example, even though Voltaire opposed war, he praised Catherine the Great's excursions into the Ottoman Empire, an act of naked aggression by the Russians to take over Ottoman territory. And Voltaire said, oh, it's not naked aggression. Oh, it's not trying to seize territory. It's a way of extending civilization to those barbaric Turks who obviously need civilization by killing them. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, see, that's the point of the matter. Oftentimes these philosophers, when it personally benefited them, Voltaire was, a fan of Catherine the Great. He said, what she's doing is okay. Murdering, pillaging, rampaging through a foreign country, uninvited. She's just trying to bring civilization. Yeah. Frederick the Great, though, had made many changes in Prussia that could be termed progressive. Oh, look at this. It looks like an SAQ if I ever found one. He brought in workers from outside of Prussia who possessed a particular set of skills. And if you don't turn in that paper, I will find you, and I will. Oh, I lost my thought, Liam. Anyway, he brought in workers from outside of Prussia, directed new attention towards Prussian agriculture. Swamps were drained, introducing new crops into Prussia. The potato. I cannot tell you the change monger the potato was. The potato contains so many more calories per acre than an acre of grain, and with a lot less cultivation and a lot less, the potato actually grew well in the rainy, acidic soil of Eastern and Northern Europe. Northern and Eastern Europe, Ireland, places like that, and the turnip. Both crops were from the New World. Established a land credit association to help landowners raise money for agricultural improvements. Most people did not prosper, though, under Frederick the Great's rule, because the tax burden fell most heavily on the peasants and the townspeople, a mistake already made in France, where they only taxed the third estate. He, however, was a tolerant ruler. He allowed both Catholics and Jews to settle in his predominantly Lutheran Prussia, but always appointed Protestants to positions of authority in his army and his government. He ordered the codification of Prussian law. I say, what does that mean? It means they actually wrote down the law so that if a person was accused of a crime, here the law is in writing, they can prepare a defense. For so many of these countries, the law was not codified. It was just the law. It was like, floating around in space somewhere. A few privileged people knew it, the judges. But here, by codifying it, people could defend themselves. His nickname became First Servant of the State, and that's what he wanted to be known. That was the enlightened part of him. The government under Frederick II, Frederick the Great, became more bureaucratic and less personal of his rule. Now, the most enlightened of the enlightened despots, now we're going to find out about him, and this is a test question. Joseph II of Austria, the son of Maria Theresa, slept on straw and ate nothing but beef. He wanted to, by sleeping on straw, he felt that made him one of the common people, because back then they didn't have mattresses, the commoners didn't. They slept on straw, and so he slept on straw. Joseph II sincerely wanted to improve the lot of his own people. He was well-intentioned. By the way, his nickname was the Musical King. See, he was an enlightened despot. Louis XIV of France thought that he was a ballet dancer, and he performed in the National Ballet, the National Theater. Joseph II thought he was a musician. He took music, learned how to perform music, because he thought that was what an enlightened despot does. He learned something, a craft, an art, a skill. So he was well-intentioned but naive, and the result of his rule, was a series of aristocratic and peasant rebellions that crossed the Habsburg Empire. You say, what does that mean? So Joseph II tries to reform the empire by giving more and more freedom to the peasants, serfs. Well, first of all, the nobility who owned the peasants and the serfs said, why are you taking this away from us? Then the peasants, they were unhappy. They revolted against Joseph. Then the peasants and serfs said, we want more freedom. You didn't give us enough. So they revolted. Yeah. See, because Joseph II violated every Machiavellian rule there was. It's better to be respected than to be loved. And Joseph II wanted to be loved. No. Austria was a diverse empire and very hard to unify. Yeah. Yeah, it was. I mean, because there were so many different ethnicities living in the Austrian Empire, so many different religions living in the Austrian Empire, very difficult to unite. Maria Theresa had practically guaranteed the Hungarians, who were the largest and loudest ethnic group in the Austrian Empire, some form of self-rule. MT, Maria Theresa, had sought to solidify the rule of the state outside of Hungary. Maria Theresa tried to help the peasantry, but limiting the robot by limiting the robot. By limiting the robot, which is a word that is on your test, robot. Are you laughing, Mr. Arlinghouse? The amount of labor that was required. I mean, it's called I'll tell you, I'm just getting old. In France, in Austria, it's called the robot, and I can't remember what it's called in France. What they both are is a tax paid for not in money, but in labor. And I think it begins with a C, but I can't remember what it is. I'll remember it. When I'm driving home, I'll remember it. But yes, Maria Theresa tried to help the peasantry by limiting the robot, which was the amount of labor as a tax, but her concern was not humanitarian, but trying to improve the pool of potential recruits for the military. So she was getting these peasants out of their feudal labor obligation to the nobility, but not because she wanted to help them, because she wanted to recruit them into the military. Still can't remember. Joseph II was more wide-ranging in his reforms than his mother. All right, here's what you want to write down. It looks like an SAQ to me. He wanted to increase the size of the Austrian Empire. He wanted to answer the pluralism of the empire's diverse peoples by centralizing government control. He tried to reduce Hungarian autonomy. That means Hungarian self-rule. Autonomy means self-rule. Learn big words, Mr. Arlinghouse. And he refused to have himself crowned King of Hungary on principle. He required the use of German in all government matters, which, empires have done before. I mean, for example, when the British took over India, it required all Indians who speak 1,000 different dialects of Hindi to speak English first in official government documents, speak English. And remember, the British also required that the Irish, the Scottish, and the Welsh speak English, even though that was not their native language. And so Joseph II here required the use of German in all government matters. The Huns, Hungarians, Magyars, Hungarians resisted. By 1790, Joseph had to rescind most of his measures. Joseph II tried to answer religious dogmatism of his mother with toleration. Dogmatism, that means that his mother was a bona fide, dyed-in-the-wool staunch Roman Catholic. And Joseph was Roman Catholic as well, but he said we should tolerate the other religions. Maria Theresa had been an advocate of Catholicism and an opponent of toleration of other faiths. Joseph was also a practicing Catholic, but he favored a policy of toleration. He extended freedom of worship to Lutherans, Calvinists, and Greek Orthodox Christians. From 1781 to 1789, he issued a series of edicts that relieved Jews in his empire of A, certain taxes, and B, signs of personal degradation. What signs of personal degradation do you think Jews would have to endure? Outward signs. Do you know, Mr. Arlinghouse? We all should know. Jews throughout the history of Europe were forced to wear the six-pointed star, the Star of David, which is the symbol of Judaism. Only that star, when you say, well, okay, what's wrong with that? Well, the star was yellow. And you say, well, okay, yellow is the color of cowardice, and that was intentional. So Joseph said, don't have to wear that anymore. He also extended Jews the right of private worship. Jews, however, were not granted the full rights of equality as other Habsburg subjects. He also intended to bring some of the institutions of the Roman Catholic Church under his direct control. I can't remember what that tax was. I think it starts with a C. In French, tax paid by labor. Anyway, he also attempted to bring some of the institutions of the Roman Catholic Church under his direct control. And yeah, that's undertaking a lot. He forbade direct communications between bishops living in Austria, Roman Catholic bishops, and the Pope. He dissolved more than 600 monasteries, where monks live and are trained, and confiscated these lands which belonged to the Roman Catholic Church for the Austrian government. He dissolved the traditional Roman Catholic seminaries, which instill loyalty to the Pope and not enough concern for their future parishioners, according to Joseph II. In effect, Joseph's policies made priests the employees of the state of Austria, ending the influence of the Roman Catholic Church as an independent institution in Habsburg's land. The ecclesiastical policies of Joseph II, known as Josephinism, that looks like a good word, predated those policies, those same policies in the French Revolution. Yes. Joseph sought to improve the economic life of his domains. He also reconstructed the judicial system to make more laws uniform and rational and to lessen the influence of local landlords. I mean, this would be a good SAQ question. The changes brought on by Joseph II of Austria. Joseph introduced a system of reforms that touched the very heart of the social structure of the rural countryside. He did not try to abolish the authority of the landlords over their peasants, but he did try to make that authority more moderate and subject to oversight of the crown. Corvée, it's called a corvée, C-O-U-R-V-E-E. Corvée, a tax in France paid by labor. Corvée, I told you. Anyway, here's the big one. He abolished serfdom. He abolished serfdom as a legally sanctioned condition of servitude. That's huge. It's like Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves, because literally that's what it is. He's freeing all these people of their feudal obligations of being owned by lords. He granted the right to marry. He granted the right to marry, to serfs, to engage in skilled work, and to have children engaged in skilled work without the Lord's permission. He also tried to make land ownership and leasing property to serfs easier. Near the end of his reign, there's a lot on him, isn't there? Near the end of his reign, he proposed that any and all who owned land would be taxed, regardless of their social status. That made enemies of him with lots of people. He's making the nobility pay taxes. Nobility, no likey. You know what I'm saying? He abolished the robot and commuted it into a monetary tax. So the serfs had to pay a monetary tax, but only part of that tax was to go to the landlord and the rest to the state. Some nobles resisted this effort. It was never enforced after the death of Joseph II. It caused great turmoil as peasants revolted over the interpretation of the new rights. Like I said, the peasants were like, we deserve more rights. Hungarians resisted Joseph's centralization measures and forced him to rescind them. That means take them back. Joseph never understood the importance of consolidating political constituencies. You say, what does that mean? Even kings need political support. Catherine the Great understood that. To put down Pugachev's rebellion, she got support from her nobility and said, okay, I'm not going to be liberal anymore. I'm not going to be enlightened anymore. We're going to have absolute rule. You nobles can do whatever you want to your peasants, as long as you help me put down this rebellion. See, Catherine did that. Joseph never understood that you need political support, other people supporting you to support your policies. Even as a king, on Joseph's death, the crown went to his brother Leopold II. Leopold was coerced into repealing the most controversial decrees, such as that on taxation. In other issues, Leopold disagreed with his brother, such as returning the local authority to the nobility to ensure them a voice in government. In other words, he gave the nobles back their authority. Leopold kept Joseph's policies on religion and tried to keep the government centralized as possible. Let's pick up with Roman number 21 when we start again tomorrow, which will be Friday. All right, n'est-ce pas? Verstehen Sie das? Make sure you look over that rubric. Now, you guys who are in my B classes, the one that meets Thursday and Friday, we're going to go over doing LAQs. We're going to go over doing LAQs on Thursday and I guess Friday as well, because we have to learn the writing process. It's an important part of the AP test. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to go. Have a good day, and tomorrow's election day. I mean, in real time. Tomorrow's election day, and thank goodness this will all be over. The election anyway. No more campaign ads. I hate campaign. I can say that. I can say that. I hate campaign ads. Hate them. All right. Bye now.